Today, we're going to talk about life and death stuff. Big, important things. Stories that have been told and retold for centuries. We'll talk about love and Jesus and prophets and traditions that were here before any of us were alive and will be told years after we are all gone. Grace loved the stories and found deep meaning in them. She had 2 master's degrees in theology, both of which she started after 50. When I was in grad school, there was a little nun from the Order of the Sisters of Mercy named Margaret Farley, who was a professor of Christian ethics at Yale. In April, toward the end of my first year, she started class by saying, "Martin Luther was right," which, coming from a nun, was a little unexpected. Lutheran and Catholic theologians to this day don't see eye to eye, but she went on to talk about the amazing theological insight that Luther had 500 years ago. And what I remember clearly more than 25 years after that lecture was this: Jesus, by dying on the cross, was God's way of saying to humanity, "You are acceptable to me." Sola fide was Luther's guiding principle, which means only faith. In other words, nothing we can do will make us more acceptable, and faith is a response to the acceptance and love of the Creator. I don't know if students ever applauded professors at your university, but we did for this lecture. It was that good. I believe that is what faith meant to my mom, and her mission was to model that acceptance. In the Gospel according to Mark, Jesus says that the second most important command from God is, love your neighbor as yourself. My mom nailed the first part, love your neighbor. But what has always been challenging to me about this passage is that it assumes that the listener has no trouble with loving yourself. And most people don't have any trouble. Many people I've come across take it to extremes. But what if, through hardship and trauma, a person didn't learn to love oneself? What then? Those of us who were closest to Grace knew that she always felt like she wasn't worthy of love and had self-doubts that none of us really understand. Most of you knew her. Some of you knew her well, and if you knew her, you know that she loved you. If you didn't know her, she loves you too, and the legacy of that love shines on here today. You can see it. You can see her in the faces of my brother and me, and in the faces of her 5 grandchildren, Katie, Emma, Austin, Natalie, and Ashley. Nana loved everyone, but of all the people who have ever lived in the history of the world, you were her favorites. And I hope that her example of perseverance and faith stays with you. She loved you beyond all logic and understanding, and words fail me as I try to come up with an adequate way to talk about it. Grace is a hospital chaplain who sat with thousands of people in their time of sadness and grief, dealing with sickness, death, and loss. She would often pray with patients. If they didn't want to pray, she would sit with them and talk about the weather or sports. She loved college and pro football, and my girls will tell you why she loved football so much if you ask them later. And if they didn't want to talk, sometimes she would just sit silently in the room. She was there to support the terminally ill and their families as they went through the most difficult times. And I think her faith drove her to suit up in the chaplain uniform day after day and be present in service to others. Her life was not easy, and I think her life experience has made her a better chaplain. As a little girl, her leg was badly burned, and she had skin grafts and large scars on her lower leg, which she was always self-conscious about. She lost her dad when she was 13 and her husband when she was 47. He left her with a family business in which all of her money was tied up. It was devastating. I remember it, I was there. She went into survival mode and found a way through, sold the business and went back to school. In 2012, she was in her favorite place, Cutwater on Lake Michigan, and she had a severe stroke. I was with my family at Disney World and remember being on the phone with Doug many times. Her life hung in the balance, and I tried to balance my concern for her with trying to have a good time on vacation, and I waited for the call that I should come right away, but the call never came. She refused to give up. She returned to service as a chaplain after only about 3 months, and even though she had significant trouble walking and had lost a lot of mobility on her left side, she kept at it and got an electric scooter and a walker and kept going as a chaplain for another 2 years. Even with all her own difficulties, she was still able to serve others. While she was in rehab from the stroke, sometimes I would go over to her condo and sit with her cat. That cat hated me. She hated everyone, especially the grandchildren. But the cat was so lonely without my mom there that after I sat there for a while, she would come out and sit on my lap. After Grace got back from the hospital, she was back to fleeing to the basement as soon as she heard footsteps coming up the driveway. Mom was her favorite. My mom faced all her struggles with good humor, faith, and a positive attitude. She never gave up, and according to the hospice nurses I talked to, she set new standards for tenacity in the last few weeks of her life. Like most of us, she doubted if she was worthy of love. According to Luther, it doesn't matter. Love and acceptance is not something we earn. That's true for all of you here too. In this world where an incomprehensibly powerful array of artificial intelligence has been built for the express purpose of making you question your worth, consider the idea that you are acceptable just as you are. And if you ever need a reminder, think back on an interaction you had with my mom while she was still here, and you will know it's true. You are acceptable just because you are you. And if you want to be reminded of her, send my daughter Katie an email. She has Grace's old phone, and the email signature still says, quote, "Sent from my iPhone, those who wait upon the Lord will rise up as wings of eagles." It's a little off the exact wording from Isaiah, which makes it 100% pure, classic, vintage Nana. Rest in peace, Mom.